What happens when a sharp-tongued talk show host tries to humiliate a powerful black entrepreneur on live TV? She thought she could tear her down, make her second-guess herself. But no one saw what happened next. The audience was left speechless, social media exploded, and what began as a simple interview became a cultural moment. This is the story of Vanessa Cole, the woman who refused to back down. Leave a comment and share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more, because the truth deserves to be told. Vanessa Cole sat at the desk in her spacious, modern office, the skyline of Atlanta, Georgia stretching behind her through floor-to-ceiling windows. It had taken her over a decade to reach this point, leading a multimillion-dollar business empire built from nothing but determination, grit, and an unshakable belief in her vision. She was proud of what she had accomplished, but more than anything, she was passionate about giving back. Her latest initiative, Elevate, was her way of ensuring that young black women with entrepreneurial dreams wouldn't have to face the same struggles she did. The program offered mentorship, funding guidance, and networking opportunities to aspiring businesswomen, many of whom had the talent and drive, but lacked the resources to succeed. That's why, when her assistant Renee Parker burst into her office with an email flagged urgent, Vanessa had no idea that this moment would set the stage for a national controversy. "You're not going to believe this," Renee said, practically bouncing with excitement as she placed the printed email on Vanessa's desk. Vanessa arched an eyebrow, setting aside her coffee as she read the bold subject line, "Invitation to appear on The Real View." Confirmation needed. Her breath hitched. The Real View was no ordinary talk show. It was one of the most watched programs in America, pulling in millions of viewers daily. Political leaders, celebrities, business moguls, only the most influential figures were invited. It was the kind of platform that could take her initiative Elevate to a whole new level. "They want me to be a guest?" she asked, her voice cautious yet intrigued. "Yes," Renee grinned. "And they specifically said they want to discuss Elevate and how it's impacting young black women in business." "Vanessa, this could be a game changer." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her fingers lightly tapping the desk. She knew what this meant: national exposure, increased funding opportunities, and the ability to inspire thousands, if not millions, of young women watching from home. This was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. But as thrilled as she was, a flicker of concern crept into her mind. The Real View's lead host, Victoria Hastings, was infamous for her aggressive interview style. She had a reputation for putting guests on the spot, twisting words and pushing controversial narratives. More than once, Vanessa had seen high-profile guests struggle under Victoria's sharp, no-nonsense questioning. Victoria wasn't just a journalist. She was a strategic provocateur, a woman who knew exactly how to craft the kind of television moments that would go viral. Her interviews had made headlines countless times, often because of how uncomfortably intense they became. Vanessa glanced at Renee. "You do realize who Victoria Hastings is, right?" Renee's enthusiasm dimmed slightly, but she nodded. "I do, and I won't lie, she's tough. But Vanessa, you've handled investors, boardrooms, and media before. You know your mission better than anyone. If anyone can handle Victoria, it's you." Vanessa exhaled slowly. Renee was right. She had built her business from scratch, survived ruthless negotiations with corporate giants, and faced discrimination at every step of the way. She wasn't afraid of tough questions. "Let's do it," she finally said. A slow smile creeping onto her lips. The next week was a whirlwind. Vanessa and her PR team worked tirelessly to prepare for any possible angle Victoria might take. Her business background, solid. She knew her numbers, her strategies, and her vision like the back of her hand. Her initiative, It was built on research, data, and first-hand experience. There was no weak point Victoria could exploit. Her personal resilience, unshakable. Still, something about this interview unsettled her. She had a feeling this wouldn't just be about Elevate. As the flight to New York City approached, Vanessa found herself mentally rehearsing potential responses. What if Victoria tried to discredit her work? What if she turned the conversation into a political spectacle? She shook off the thoughts. No, she had been given this opportunity for a reason, and she wasn't going to waste it. The evening before the interview, Vanessa checked into the Five Seasons Hotel in Manhattan, her mind still buzzing. From her hotel suite's window, she could see the bright lights of Times Square blinking below. The city never slept, but tonight she needed to. She took a deep breath and checked her phone. Her mother had sent a message. "No matter what happens tomorrow, I'm already so proud of you." A warm smile spread across Vanessa's face. She needed that reminder. No matter what, she was here to uplift, to inspire, to speak truth. She placed her phone on the nightstand and turned off the lights, letting the quiet hum of the city outside lull her into rest. The next morning, Vanessa stepped out of the black SUV that had been arranged by the network, pulling in front of the Real View's studio headquarters. A cluster of cameras and onlookers had already gathered outside, the show's signature logo flashing on the building's LED screens. She took a deep breath. This was it. The production team welcomed her inside, leading her through the sleek, bustling corridors of the television studio. Her heart pounded in anticipation as she was ushered into hair and makeup, where a stylist gave her a final touch-up. As she sat in the chair, staring at her reflection, she thought about the young women watching at home. This was about more than her. It was about them. "We're ready for you, Miss Cole," a production assistant said, smiling as she gestured toward the studio entrance. Vanessa stood, smoothing down her perfectly tailored royal blue blazer. She exhaled one last time and walked toward the brightly lit stage. As she stepped into the studio, she could already see Victoria Hastings sitting in her signature chair, a polite but sharp smile on her lips. The woman who had built a career on cutting guests down with her words. The audience buzzed with excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced over the studio speakers, "please welcome our guest, Vanessa Cole." The applause was warm, the energy electric. Vanessa walked toward the chair across from Victoria, shaking the host's hand as they exchanged pleasantries. She sat down, crossing her legs gracefully, her posture composed. Victoria adjusted her microphone and turned toward Vanessa with that signature look of calculated curiosity. "Vanessa Cole, ladies and gentlemen," Victoria said with a grin. "The self-made businesswoman who says she's changing the face of entrepreneurship." The audience clapped, but Vanessa didn't miss the way Victoria's grin didn't quite reach her eyes. Something about it felt rehearsed. The interview had begun, and Vanessa had no idea just how much it would change everything. Vanessa sat with effortless poise, her hands resting lightly on her lap as the bright studio lights cast a polished glow across the sleek, modern set of The Real View. She had done countless interviews before, but this was different. The audience, the cameras, the millions of people watching at home. This was the biggest stage she had ever been on. Victoria Hastings, her host, smiled politely from across the glossy table. Everything about the woman screamed control, from her perfectly pressed emerald green blazer to the calculated way she tilted her head, always appearing engaged yet subtly condescending. Vanessa knew that beneath the surface of the warm welcome was something more strategic, more deliberate. Still, she remained confident. The first few minutes of the interview went as expected. Victoria asked about Vanessa's journey, and she responded smoothly, sharing how she had started from nothing, selling handmade jewelry at flea markets as a teenager. using every cent she earned to build something greater. She spoke about the challenges of being a black woman in business, the barriers she had faced, and how her initiative, Elevate, was designed to break down those obstacles for young black women trying to follow in her footsteps. The audience nodded along and some even clapped at key moments. For a while, it seemed like the segment was going well. But then, Vanessa caught the subtle shift in Victoria's body language. The host leaned forward just slightly, her fingers tapping against the glossy surface of the table. Her smile remained, but there was a new intensity behind her eyes. The warm, introductory phase was over. Now, she was getting to the real reason Vanessa was here. Victoria adjusted her microphone and, with a tone that feigned curiosity but was laced with something sharper, asked, "Vanessa, your initiative Elevate is designed specifically for young black women. Why focus on black women exclusively? Some might say that's discriminatory." Vanessa had anticipated this question, but it still felt like a slap when it was spoken aloud in front of a national audience. She took a measured breath and kept her voice steady. "It's not about exclusion, Victoria. It's about addressing a need. For decades, black women have faced systemic barriers in entrepreneurship, limited funding, fewer mentorship opportunities, and lack of representation in leadership. Elevate is about filling those gaps and ensuring that talent and drive aren't wasted just because the system wasn't built to support them." There was a polite round of applause from some sections of the audience, but Vanessa noticed a few people shifting in their seats. Victoria had planted a seed of doubt, and she wasn't done yet. Victoria tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "But wouldn't it be better to help all women instead of focusing on just one group? After all, women as a whole face challenges in business. Why not be more inclusive?" Vanessa smiled, but there was steel behind it. She had heard this argument before. "Victoria, let me ask you something," Vanessa said, keeping her voice calm. "If a house is on fire, do you call the fire department and say, 'Hey, let's pour water on all the houses on the block just to be fair'? Or do you focus on the one that's burning?" There was a ripple of laughter and applause in the audience. Victoria's expression didn't change, but Vanessa could see the slightest twitch in her fingers, an indication that the host wasn't expecting such a direct counterargument. But Victoria wasn't one to back down. Instead, she took another approach. She folded her hands neatly and gave a small, knowing smile before delivering her next question. "A lot of critics argue that initiatives like yours create dependency. That instead of teaching people to work harder, you're giving them crutches. How do you respond to that?" The words were like ice. Vanessa felt a slow burn in her chest but forced herself to remain composed. "Providing resources isn't the same as creating dependency," she said firmly. "When banks offer loans to startups, are they making businesses dependent? No, they're providing capital so businesses can grow. When the government offers grants for education, is that creating dependency? Or is it leveling the playing field so people have a real shot at success?" There was a murmur of agreement from the audience, and Vanessa could see some heads nodding. She knew she had landed that point well, but Victoria wasn't finished. Now she was about to strike harder. The host took a breath, shifting slightly in her chair before delivering the next blow. "If anyone can succeed with hard work, why do so many black people still struggle? Maybe they're just not working hard enough." The air in the room froze. There was an audible gasp from parts of the audience. A few people widened their eyes while others turned to each other in disbelief. Even some of the production crew behind the cameras looked momentarily stunned. Vanessa's stomach tightened. She could feel every muscle in her body tense as the weight of Victoria's words settled into the space between them. She knew this kind of rhetoric. She had heard it before in boardrooms, at networking events, even in classrooms growing up. But hearing it here, in front of millions of viewers delivered with such casual ease, it was something else entirely. For a moment, she felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't let them fall. Not now. The entire room was waiting for her response. She took a deep breath and met Victoria's gaze with unshaken resolve. "Victoria," she began, her voice quieter now but stronger, "do you really believe that black people just don't work hard enough?" Victoria didn't answer immediately. She gave a small shrug. "I'm just asking the question." Vanessa nodded slowly, pressing her hands together on the table. Then she spoke with absolute clarity. "We work just as hard as anyone else, but the truth is, hard work alone isn't enough when the system isn't fair. If a race starts and some runners are shackled at the starting line while others have a clear path, you can't blame the ones in chains for finishing last." There was a beat of silence. Then applause. Loud, growing, filling the studio. Some audience members clapped hesitantly at first, as if afraid to make a statement. Others stood up entirely. The energy in the room shifted, and for the first time since the interview began, Vanessa felt like she had control again. But Victoria wasn't done yet. Her expression didn't waver. If anything, there was a glint in her eyes, as if she had been waiting for Vanessa to rise to this level of intensity. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a smooth, almost rehearsed cadence. "That's an interesting analogy, Vanessa," she said. "But let's talk about real-world results. If these barriers you speak of are so real, how do you explain the fact that you, yourself, are successful? Doesn't that prove that anyone can make it if they just work hard enough?" And just like that, the trap was set. Vanessa inhaled slowly, steadying herself for what she knew was coming next. She wasn't just debating Victoria anymore. She was debating an entire ideology, and she couldn't afford to lose. For the first time since the interview had started, Vanessa felt herself wavering. Not in her confidence, not in her belief in her cause, but in her ability to keep her emotions entirely in check. Victoria's words, "Maybe they're just not working hard enough," had hit somewhere deep. Not just because of what was said, but because of what it represented. This wasn't just a question. It wasn't just a comment. It was the same dismissal, the same gaslighting, the same denial of reality that black people had faced for generations. Vanessa could feel it in her bones. And as the silence in the room stretched on, thick, charged, expectant, she could feel the weight of millions of eyes on her, waiting for her to react. She felt the sting of tears threatening to rise, an involuntary human response to an insult too bold to ignore, too calculated to be brushed aside. But she wouldn't let them fall. Not here, not in front of her. She inhaled slowly, lifting her chin just slightly, blinking away the emotion, letting the steel return to her spine. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of something unbreakable. "We work just as hard as anyone else," she said, "but the system isn't fair. If a race starts with some runners shackled at the beginning, you can't blame them for finishing last." The studio erupted. Applause filled the room, real applause, not just polite agreement. Some audience members even stood up, nodding, clapping, murmuring their approval. A few turned to each other as if to say, finally, someone said it outright. But Vanessa didn't bask in the reaction. She kept her gaze locked on Victoria, watching as the host's lips pressed into a thin line, her perfectly poised exterior showing the slightest crack. But just as quickly, Victoria recovered. She adjusted in her chair, crossing one leg over the other, her tone shifting into something cool, controlled, and deceptively casual. "That's an interesting analogy, Vanessa," she said, "but let's push this a little further. If I started a program that only helped white women, wouldn't you call that racist? There it was. The trap. The false equivalency that people used to derail discussions about equity. The way they tried to make deliberate repair sound like exclusion. Vanessa almost sighed. She had heard this before. She let the smallest smile tug at the corners of her lips. Then, with the same measured tone she had mastered in boardrooms full of men who underestimated her, she delivered her response. If white women had been systematically denied opportunities for centuries, I'd be the first to support a program helping them. A wave of agreement rippled through the audience. A few people nodded audibly, muttering things like, "Exactly." For the first time, Vanessa saw Victoria momentarily falter. Not dramatically, not obviously, but there was something in the way she briefly glanced toward the producers behind the cameras, as if recalculating. As if she hadn't expected the audience to side with Vanessa so openly. Vanessa wasn't just holding her own. She was winning. The shift in the room was tangible. It was no longer just an interview. It was a battle of ideas, and Vanessa's clarity, her unshakable logic, was cutting through the noise. But Vanessa knew Victoria wasn't done yet. And the next attack, it would be even sharper. Because when people like Victoria started losing control of the narrative, they pushed even harder. Vanessa's heart pounded, but she steadied herself. She had come prepared. She had lived this fight before, and she wasn't backing down now. For the first time in the interview, Victoria Hastings looked like she was losing control. She had spent years perfecting the art of breaking people down on live television. Her sharp, calculated questions had made politicians stumble, celebrities lash out, and activists backpedal. She had built an empire on making her guests uncomfortable, forcing them into defensive positions where she could steer the narrative however she pleased. But tonight, something was different. Vanessa Cole wasn't folding. She wasn't scrambling for the right words or tripping over herself trying to soften the conversation. Instead, she had taken everything Victoria had thrown at her and turned it into an opportunity to educate, to correct, to elevate the discussion rather than sink into a defensive stance. And now, with the audience reacting more and more in her favor, Victoria was running out of options. She needed to regain control. And so, she pulled her final card. The argument she believed was unbeatable. She shifted in her seat, her hands folding neatly in front of her as she tilted her head slightly, her trademark posture of faux curiosity. Then, in a tone so deliberate and composed it was clear she had been waiting to deliver this moment, Victoria said, "But Vanessa, you yourself are proof that anyone can make it. If the system is as broken as you claim, then how do you explain your own success? Aren't you contradicting your own point?" The words settled over the room like a fog. A few people in the audience murmured. Others nodded, considering the statement. It was the bootstrap argument, packaged neatly into a rhetorical trap. Victoria had used it before, and it always landed well with a certain subset of viewers. It played on the idea that hard work was the great equalizer, that people who wanted it badly enough would always find a way, regardless of the odds stacked against them. It was a dangerous argument because on the surface, it seemed logical. But Vanessa knew better. This wasn't just a question. It was an attempt to dismiss everything she had said, to erase the struggles, the barriers, the history that had kept so many like her from ever getting a real chance. Victoria was trying to use Vanessa's own success as a weapon against her. For a brief moment, Vanessa simply sat there, letting the question linger. She could feel every camera trained on her, every microphone waiting to capture her response. She knew that whatever she said next wouldn't just define this interview, it would define how the world remembered this moment. So she didn't rush, she didn't fumble. Instead, she leaned forward, not aggressively, not in anger, but with deliberate, quiet intensity. She locked eyes with Victoria, ensuring that every word she spoke would land exactly where it needed to. Then, with absolute clarity, Vanessa responded. "I didn't succeed because the system is fair," she said, her voice firm yet measured. "I succeeded despite it being unfair." The impact was instantaneous. The audience erupted in applause. Loud, thunderous, overwhelming. Some people rose to their feet, clapping furiously. Others shouted in agreement, the energy in the room shifting completely in Vanessa's favor. Even the camera crew, professionals who had seen countless interviews in this very studio, were exchanging glances, a few of them nodding subtly, as if acknowledging the weight of what had just been said. Vanessa could feel it in her bones. This moment was bigger than just her. This was history unfolding in real time. And for the first time, Victoria Hastings knew it too. The host's expression faltered for just a fraction of a second, so fast that most wouldn't have noticed. But Vanessa did. For the first time, Victoria didn't have a response. She had expected Vanessa to deflect, to soften her stance, to maybe acknowledge the point and try to find some middle ground. But instead, Vanessa had struck with unshakable truth. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. She exhaled through her nose, shifting slightly in her chair as if trying to compose herself. But there was no coming back from this. She had lost. The moment had already slipped from her grasp, and she knew it. So, rather than try to continue the battle, she did what people like her always did when confronted with undeniable truth. She retreated. With a forced chuckle, Victoria flicked her wrist dismissively and gave a tight-lipped smile. "Well," she said, her voice noticeably more clipped than before, "I guess we'll have to agree to disagree." It was a coward's way out, and everyone in that room knew it. Vanessa didn't react right away. She simply sat there, watching as Victoria tried to mask her discomfort behind a professional smile. Finally, Vanessa leaned back in her chair, folding her hands neatly in her lap, her expression one of quiet triumph. Because she knew what had just happened. She had won. Victoria had come into this interview with a clear agenda: to discredit, to undermine, to poke holes in Vanessa's message and shift the audience's perception. Instead, Vanessa had flipped the entire script. She had turned every attack into an opportunity to educate. She had taken every attempt to diminish her and transformed it into an undeniable moment of strength. And now, millions of people were watching. Vanessa glanced toward the audience, taking in the faces of the people who had been hanging onto every word of the exchange. Some were still clapping. Some were looking at her with pride, with admiration, with awe. And then she thought about the young black women watching from home. The ones who had felt like their voices had never been heard. The ones who had doubted their worth because society had told them they weren't enough. The ones who had needed to see someone stand their ground and refuse to shrink in the face of disrespect. This was for them. Victoria might have controlled the studio, but Vanessa had controlled the moment. And long after the cameras stopped rolling, after the social media explosion that was already happening, this moment would be remembered as a turning point, as a victory, as proof that standing in your truth is always worth it. Victoria Hastings could agree to disagree all she wanted, but the truth was undeniable. The moment Vanessa Cole stepped off the Real View stage, she could feel the shift in energy around her. The studio, once filled with the subtle hum of controlled production, was now electric. Crew members whispered amongst themselves. The producers, who had orchestrated hundreds of interviews, were glued to their screens, replaying the final moments, their expressions a mix of disbelief and admiration. But Vanessa barely had time to process any of it, because as soon as she entered the green room, her phone exploded. A constant, overwhelming barrage of notifications flooded her screen: texts, calls, Twitter mentions, Instagram tags, emails. Her assistant, Renee Parker, was already waiting, phone clutched tightly in her hands, her face pale with shock. "Vanessa," she breathed, practically shoving her phone toward her. "You need to see this." Vanessa glanced at the screen and then froze. Within minutes of the interview ending, the hashtags Vanessa Cole, The Real View, and Knockout Response were trending worldwide. Her final words, "I didn't succeed because the system is fair. I succeeded despite it being unfair," had been clipped, subtitled, and shared thousands of times. Vanessa Cole just gave the most powerful TV moment of the year, a masterclass in composure and truth-telling. This wasn't an interview. This was a public execution of bad faith arguments. Vanessa Cole, ATE. Vanessa Cole didn't just answer questions. She changed the game. "I will be showing this to my future children." When Victoria said, "Aren't you contradicting yourself?" and Vanessa hit her with, "Despite it being unfair," phew, history was made. Michelle Obama tweeted a clip with the caption, "This is how you hold your ground. This is how you inspire. Well done, Vanessa." Beyoncé posted a clip to Instagram with a single word, "Queen." Ava DuVernay quote tweeted, "This is why representation matters. This is why we fight." Vanessa Cole, news headlines were already running stories. Vanessa Cole delivers a defining TV moment on The Real View. New York Times, entrepreneur Vanessa Cole shuts down bad faith arguments on race and opportunity with facts. CNN, Victoria Hastings faces backlash over loaded questions during viral interview. The Guardian, Vanessa barely registered the world shifting around her. She simply stared at the screen. The reality of what had just happened was hitting her in waves. She hadn't just spoken her truth. She had created a moment, and the moment was only getting bigger. While Vanessa was being celebrated, Victoria Hastings was being dragged. Victoria Hastings just got wrecked on her own show. She wasn't ready for Vanessa Cole. The way she tried to agree to disagree, like we didn't all just watch her get schooled. Elmau. I've seen Victoria Hastings try to humiliate guests before, but this was next level bad. An online petition surfaced calling for Victoria to apologize. Some of The Real View's biggest sponsors were suddenly reevaluating their partnerships. A leaked memo from the network suggested executives were in full-blown panic mode. Victoria had built her brand on controversy, but this time it had backfired spectacularly. She had tried to undermine Vanessa. Instead, she had launched her into global prominence. By the time Vanessa landed back in Atlanta, it felt like she was stepping into a different world. She had left for New York as a successful entrepreneur. She returned as a symbol. The airport was buzzing. News cameras lined the gates. Reporters shouted questions. Strangers held up their phones, capturing the moment. But it was the group waiting for her at the Elevate Community Center that made her pause. A crowd of young women, girls from her mentorship program, stood outside, their faces lit with excitement, admiration, and something deeper. For them, this wasn't just a viral moment, this was personal. One of them, an 18-year-old named Maya who had struggled with self-doubt since she joined the program, stepped forward, her hands gripping her phone tightly. Her voice was soft but stronger than Vanessa had ever heard it. "Miss Vanessa," she said, eyes glistening with emotion. "I watched the interview. I watched the way you stood up for us, for all of us. And she swallowed hard, trying to keep the tears at bay. "I just want to say thank you. You made me feel like I can do anything." Vanessa felt her chest tighten. She had pushed through every attack during that interview for this moment, for this girl, for the thousands like her who had spent their whole lives feeling unseen, unheard, dismissed. She gently placed a hand on Maya's shoulder, meeting her eyes with warmth and certainty. "Maya, listen to me." Vanessa's voice was soft but firm. "You've always been valuable, never let anyone make you doubt that." Maya nodded fiercely, a quiet promise between them. Later that evening, Vanessa stood before a packed room at the Elevate Community Center, her words no longer just hers, but part of something much bigger. She took a deep breath and spoke. Fairness doesn't just happen, we have to fight for it. The world won't just hand you respect. Sometimes you'll have to demand it. Sometimes you'll have to stand your ground when it would be easier to shrink. Sometimes you'll have to make people uncomfortable with the truth. And when that happens, I want you to remember this: your story, your voice, and your worth are not up for debate. The room was silent, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence filled with understanding, with determination, with change. Vanessa looked at them, these young women who would one day carry this fight forward, and she knew. She knew this moment had been bigger than just her. The interview wasn't just television. It was a shift, a signal to an entire generation that they could speak up, push back, and take space without apology. Victoria Hastings had tried to dismiss her, but instead, Vanessa Cole had ignited a movement, and it was only the beginning. Vanessa Cole's story isn't just about one woman standing up for herself. It's about the power of truth, resilience, and the courage to challenge the status quo. Her moment on The Real View was more than just a viral interview. It was a reflection of a much larger battle, a battle that people from all walks of life, across different communities, face every day. Because the truth is, injustice thrives in silence. When people are told to stop making everything about race, when marginalized voices are ignored, when the struggles of entire communities are dismissed with phrases like, "just work harder," that silence allows oppression to continue. But what Vanessa did on that stage was refuse to be silent. And that is a lesson for all of us. For those who have ever been dismissed, underestimated, or made to feel like they don't belong, know this: you do not need permission to take up space. Your voice, your experiences, and your truth are valid. Don't shrink yourself to make others comfortable. For those who have privilege, influence, and a platform, use it. Speak up when you see injustice. Amplify voices that have been silenced and challenge the biases that exist in your circles. Silence is complicity. For communities as a whole, real change doesn't happen by accident. It takes action. It takes people standing up, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it comes with backlash. It takes businesses making real commitments to diversity, schools teaching history accurately, and policies that address systemic inequalities. Fairness is not automatic. Equality is not given. It is fought for, and when one person, whether on a national stage or in a small room, dares to stand up and say, "This isn't right and I won't stay silent," it creates a ripple effect that can change everything. Vanessa Cole reminded the world of this truth. Now it's up to all of us to carry it forward. Your voice matters. Your fight matters. And together, we can build a world where fairness isn't just something we talk about, but something we live.